Are there other kinds of bells other than handbells?
I mean, there are sleigh bells, but I don't think there are sleigh bell choirs.
Oh, church bells.
Silver bells.
Obviously.
What are you doing?
I'm ringing church bells.
It's more up here.
Oh, okay. It depends on.
He just started recording.
Welcome to Church Bites, conversation that values faith communities, that also doesn't shy away from the ways in which they bite, wrestles with takes on faith, and dips into local cuisine in a way that is faithfully for the fort. Yes, welcome to Church Bites. And now for our first segment, where we take one of those local bites into a local restaurant. This is one of our classic favorite Fort Wayne establishments.
Right.
Tyler, you are the one
Right around the corner.
Hey everybody, Austin here. Real quick, before we get any farther into the episode, we'd love to be in conversation with you even more. So if you could comment down below, also like and share this video, share it with a friend who might also need to hear this, would be awesome. You can also send us an email at churchbites@stjoemin.com. That's churchbites@stjoemin.com. And we're also going to be having some live events right here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So we'd love for you to come to those events. It's going to be a safe space where we can dive even deeper into all of these topics. Details on that will be down in the description below. And hey, let's get back to the episode.
Today,
Tell us about it.
we have the chopped chicken from Shigs and Pit. That's
Which I
right,
will
folks.
not
We got
be
that
eating.
Shigs and Pit. Don't get those mixed up. And we also have some sides for you. We're ready.
Thank
So we got the mac and
you.
cheese.
Heck yeah.
And the spoonbread as sides. So
Spoonbread? What's
spoonbread.
What is spoonbread? Do tell.
Cornbread that's needs spoons to be eaten.
Okay.
It's not less bread,
intrigued.
more bread pudding.
Oh, so it's
kind of a-
dessert.
No.
No.
I don't know. It's Southern. It
All right.
sounds nice.
It is
Dig
not
in.
Southern.
It's like a,
never
no, it
heard
is.
that.
I think actually, I'm going to throw out a fact that you can fact check later, but I feel like I've seen a recipe that claimed like that this was like a Mount Vernon original. Was the spoonbread kind of concept was. It's got long history in look it up, Luke. Look it up. He's gonna look it up. I think it's a George Washington special.
Okay. And I might do a taste test of just the straight up barbecue sauce.
Oh yeah.
Because I am obsessed with barbecue sauce. Little known fact. In fact, when I
on the mac and cheese, I think.
Now, did you get
So-
just the normal barbecue, or did you get any
I got
spicy?
the regular. I like the.
Yeah.
I'm talking not in the microphone. I got the regular. I like the tangy, but
so yeah.
So all right. Let's
So here's the thing: when I did eat meat, I thought I liked meat.
we do this. I'm gonna
Except my dad would grill a steak well done, and then I'd put it in the microwave and dip it in barbecue sauce. And I realized I don't like meat. I like barbecue sauce.
No, I'm not far off from you, Christy,
So-
on that. I like barbecue
Yeah.
also. I'm gonna get a bite before Tyler gets too deep into
All right, I'm gonna try the mac and cheese first. All right, what's is this like little chili peppers or something? And a poblano. Oh, I love poblanos.
Yeah.
Oh, that is good. It has a really distinct flavor to it because of the poblanos. I like that.
Yeah, the sauce is great. Shigs has lots of different varieties in sauce.
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
The sauce is really good. All right, I'm gonna try the spoon.
A lot of Shigs sides are they're fried in peanut oil, which
Oh,
a lot
are
of
they?
people like. I
That
think
is
so.
good to know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna try this. What did we find out about spoonbread, Luke?
So
This is like corn casserole.
it looks like it originally has Native American origins. So,
That's some big
but I
bite.
did search Mount Vernon spoonbread, and there's a recipe on here from George Washington's Mount Vernon.
Yeah.
Okay.
MountVernon.org. So there's some sort of a connection there.
That's the
but
one.
Yeah.
What do
You think so?
Wikipedia
Okay.
gives it some Native American origins
Okay.
as well. So
Different than corn casserole. It tastes a lot like corn casserole. which I
So I would
love.
say it's different in that corn casserole is something you make only out of various canned good items.
Sure.
And it's got a later provenance, which is like anything canned and processed.
Yeah.
Put into and stirred up and baked, whereas the Spoonbread probably has some more I don't know. Tyler, you make Spoonbread, don't you? Do you?
I make it. I love it. It's super easy to make. Yeah, I do. Like 2 boxes of Jiffy, 2 cans of cream.
One sounds like we're casserole me.
1 can of, 1 can of regular corn, cheddar cheese, sour cream, bam, bam, bam.
I like everything.
And
you
it
just
comes
said there.
out just moist and amazing.
Love it. Strong word choice.
Lots of options at Shigs and Pit. It's a great restaurant. We recommend it. There's 2 locations now. I think the third one is.
Yeah, I think the original closed, or are closing it, but so good. And lots of great beer selection as well, if you're
Nice.
into that sort of thing,
I might just have to go for the Spoonbread.
which I am. So all those things, great things. I'm going to go chopped chicken 8.4 out of 10.
Oh, I forgot the rating.
We got to do
Yeah,
the ratings.
yeah.
Ratings.
I mean, it's so the chicken's so flavorful. You almost don't need the barbecue sauce. Like some barbecue you have, and you're like, okay, you really need the barbecue sauce,
Sure.
like to make it.
I would agree. I like their
You
chicken.
could eat it by itself. It's so flavorful and yeah, amazing.
I give the Spoonbread definitely an 8. The mac and cheese I really liked. I would have to be in the mood for it, though. You know what I mean? So I would say like a 7. But still very good.
I'd rate Shigs an 8. I'd go there anytime, pretty much. So that's a general rating, not just this right here in front of us. But yeah, I like it.
Awesome.
All right, very good. Now we should probably clean the table up, unlike we have the last couple times.
I think we're ready for Lukewarm Takes.
Our Lukewarm Take.
We got Luke to present us a story. Here we go.
Yeah, and I actually I printed off an article that you should
I feel
each
like
have
we're
a
about
copy
to
of
do
now.
like
so
a quick test.
yeah, you're allowed to look at it now. So, but
Okay.
the headline here is Michigan judge sentenced Walmart shoplifters
What?
to wash cars in the parking lot. True story. Just came out of Associated Press here recently.
Okay.
So I just want to
Fake
read a couple
news.
of the highlights here and
Just
see
kidding.
what your guys'
Gonna paper
your
cut
take
you.
is here on it. One is just the district court kind of talking about people shoplifting and how big of an issue it is. But he says, I don't think everybody that steals is a bad person. Sometimes people are just down on their luck. So Walmart is actually in support of this. They're even going to provide the water and supplies. They have such an issue with shoplifting. There's actually a designated parking spot for police there at the Walmart store
Nice.
in Michigan where this is occurring. But the judge who's doing the sentencing wants it to be kind of community building as well, saying he'll come wash cars with them. So
Whoa.
there's a service aspect, but maybe I don't want to say humiliation aspect, but some social reasons that people might not like this punishment or maybe really like this punishment. So A, what do you think of this as a punishment for shoplifting? But B, maybe some other punishments that you've seen that are good punishments, bad punishments for, it could be for anything, but we'll start with
Well,
shoplifting.
I think I have a first thought was, what kind of person is going to go get their car washed by this crew?
All of their friends. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I'm
somebody
thinking.
out there who
It's
had an ankle bracelet on.
It's
and-
either a friend or it's
think
just
they
people
did.
who are terrible people who want to be
Yes.
like, that's what you get.
or both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Friends who are also terrible people.
terrible people. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, here's my first thought. If shoplifting's such an issue, hire cashiers.
Yeah. Instead of having them
Actually-
wash the cars, have them run a register.
Run a register.
Yeah.
Under supervision, obviously, because they might be prone
They're
to
gonna need
stealing.
supervision.
Right.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, like everyone's checking out so much. Like there's
Yeah.
literally and I'm definitely a grandma millennial when it comes to this. I'm like, I barely ever go through self-checkout. But I'm like, your
Well, I'm afraid
You're
of the
not
robots.
asking for it,
That's a
but
conversation for
You just
another
have to be
time.
nice to them. Tell them please and thank you.
I don't know. I was
But-
not on board of this at first, and then he's like, "I'll be out there washing cars with them."
But like, why?
I think it shows that, hey, there's a heart behind it. At first, I thought it was just like, oh, shame. Now we all get to just throw tomatoes in public at you. But I don't know. There's something about, I think, the intent here of like, I'll be out there with them. At first, honestly, I thought the judge probably just really needed his car washed, and he was like, I can fix this. Y'all tomorrow need to be out at Walmart because I'll be there to get my car washed. But then I'm like, oh, well, when you said that with be out there, I think he's trying to think outside the box to say, how can we really resolve this issue and meet people in a real way? I feel like these individuals are probably really young and maybe just made a bad choice. I don't know. I'm making an assumption. And he's maybe trying to provide something, perspective shift. So I'm for it.
I bet they're all ages.
Yeah,
Think so?
Definitely.
Oh, yeah. All ages
would-
people and people who don't need the stuff. Like the shoplifting phenomenon is one of like people just do it for the rush.
Nice.
Just to see just like that little burst of adrenaline that they feel when they stick that pack of gum in their pocket and walk out of there with it or whatever.
Here's the thing. I get that rush just by going into the store and not buying anything and leaving. Same
like,
rush. I swear, I will turn my pockets
I think it can
inside
become
out.
addictive. And I think it can become addictive for people of all ages. Like, I think it's just a thing that, like...
So do you think then that car washing would deter that addiction?
I guess
it's not
I'm
going to make it
dubious.
worse. I don't know.
I don't know. Are they holding signs like they do at, like cheerleading car washes? Or
Are they
just
in
washing
bikinis?
random
Does it say what they had to wear?
It doesn't say that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I've been to
Or-
Genesee County, Michigan, and I don't think you want to see a lot of people in swimwear.
I mean,
in
he
that
Or
said,
like, are they
locale.
just
Here it
washing
says-
random cars, or is there like a line for this?
That's my biggest question: is
Yeah.
are these like the other shoppers that are there,
Ooh,
or
okay.
Right.
is there some connection with the Walmart other than they just happen to be there? But yeah, it doesn't give that detail. But I like he's thinking outside of the box. He's trying to come up with something
And it
different.
says on here he has 48 cases on the docket this day of shoplifting. I feel like he's just spitballing. And he's just
throw it
like,
at the
you know
wall.
what? He's looking at his docket going, all right,
We can just solve all these at once.
yeah, everybody meet up at Walmart. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know. I don't hate it. I mean, what's the alternative? What is he going to... a fine or something stupid?
Right.
I don't know.
I mean,
if
in
it's
that-
going to end up being community service anyway, then why not? I don't know. Make it
I just
maybe
feel there are better
impactful.
ways to serve the community.
Well,
Oh,
and
sure.
if you think about deterrence, in any event, your name's going to end up in the newspaper or whatever. You're going to have the record already. So I don't know that this is intended to be a deterrent. I think that he ends up saying, I'm going to be there and we're going to do this together, does give it a maybe perhaps more redemptive quality to, like, if you're caught shoplifting, we're going to be out here washing cars together to repay our debt to community, to the society, and I'll do it with you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's it's got something to be said for it. Maybe.
Yeah, I can appreciate the compassion behind it for sure. It gives off like, I don't know, kid breaks a window like, oh, dad and I are going to be replacing it the next day together.
So I think
Maybe
Luke's other
watching.
question was about what unusual punishments have we seen or experienced.
Yeah, this guy's out. Judge is thinking
nice.
outside the box.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Is there an outside the box punishment that you're like, oh, this one really impacted me when I had to do this, or
If you fall down the rabbit hole on YouTube of like the losers of their fantasy football league, those punishments, the stuff that those guys come up with,
Oh dear.
just great.
Is there a
Great
rabbit
stuff.
hole on YouTube you haven't fallen down? Don't answer that.
No
on
comment.
camera.
I try. No, I mean, it's so fun. I mean, chicken suits, wife's clothes. I mean, the whole thing. I mean, yeah. I mean, just really, really good
Creative,
stuff.
lots of
Yeah.
creative
A
punishments.
lot of creative punishments. All in good fun, and everybody signed up for it. Everybody knew what they were getting into. So, yeah, I don't know. But from like a litigious standpoint, I don't know.
I have one that immediately comes to mind.
Yes.
Glenn, are you familiar with what happens in Bergen if you get on the train and you have not bought a ticket, and then they come through checking for your ticket
In New
Where is
Jersey?
this?
in Berg.
I'm just kidding. Not Bergen, New Jersey. You mean in Bergen, Norway?
Yeah,
the original.
Yeah.
The OG Bergen.
The OG Bergen.
Yeah, what do they do if you don't have your ticket?
They have a pickle suit.
A pickle suit?
They have a giant pickle suit that then you're still allowed to be on the train. They don't kick you off, but you have to wear the
No,
pickle suit.
they're way too nice for that.
Yeah,
What's
that's-
funny about that is on the trains and buses and stuff in Norway, you just have to have the app and
Yeah.
download the ticket. And if you don't have the ticket, like the first time we're like, we don't know what we're doing. And they're like, oh, dumb Americans, we get it. It's okay, no big deal. We'll show you how. But next time, you better do
Next
it.
time you'll end up in a pickle suit.
In a pickle.
That was in Oslo.
Do they
I
have
don't know
a
that they do
family
that.
size?
You know,
Like a dill and
but
a
they
gherkin
even have
and then like a
videos.
sweet, like different pickles. Like, oh, we just picked
Here's
up
some
your
relish.
baby.
You're really in trouble. Like
Okay.
they even have videos on the train that's like that, and it was enough that we could tell like get caught without a ticket.
Yeah.
Where your and they're just like standing there.
I guess I didn't know that's what that
interesting.
was. I'm trying to remember, like,
Yeah.
you're talking about like on the buses and stuff?
Not
or-
the buses. Well, I don't know about on the buses. I didn't see
Yeah.
videos about it there, but on the
the
train
train.
itself.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Man, I think punishment wise.
So I guess that kind of, I mean, it's the
Personal-
social pressure thing. Like
yeah,
if
yeah.
if someone's on there with a pickle.
I went to school with a kid whose dad went to school with my mom, and one day, end of the day in fourth grade, his dad had been a real Dickens, and the teacher just used a jump rope and tied him to the chair and walked out and turned out the lights. And like an hour later, the janitor came through.
What?
And was like, "Hey, little boy, what's going on?" And he's like,
I
"Teacher
love
tied me to the
this.
chair." So by the time we got to fourth grade, this teacher was like 140. She was still
Of course.
teaching, and the family was like, "Actually, we don't want our kids to be in her class, please." Wow. But that's all that happened. Can you?
That's newsworthy today.
Yeah.
Oh
you know what
man,
I mean?
if that happened once. Yeah,
definitely-
I mean,
they'd
that's
be
like
dying.
we lived in a world where not only did it happen, but then 20 years passed, and all the families like, can we not have our kid in her class?
Yeah, actually, that wasn't a positive experience.
yeah.
Turns out.
I was forced to stand on one leg for 30 minutes for talking. And my mother went in and had a conversation with the teacher of sixth grade. She was like, not acceptable.
Let's veer this
So-
into things that teachers do
Diddler?
that are terrible.
Oh.
Yeah, let's
Hold on, I have a list.
yeah, let's go for that.
No.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
that
okay.
I think that's a good take on lukewarm takes and on the concepts of punishment, justice, pain, suffering.
Pain and suffering.
I will
In the
say
world.
I appreciate they're not putting people in jail when they don't need to be going to jail.
Or
So-
pickle suits.
Or pickle suits.
A few more people in Genesee County, Michigan, walking around in pickle suits could be exactly what they need. I'm pretty sure that that's like.
Actually, I kind of think that would be a good, like, for, like, prostitution. You know what I mean? They have to, like, go back out there, but put on this pickle suit.
Wait,
you know?
wait, for the John or for the hooker?
Both. They have to go together. I don't know. I we might be onto something with the pickle suits. I
mean, I like it.
Everybody would know.
I like it because it. The pickle. Christy, do you need resuscitation of some kind?
I don't know how much air can come out of one person.
I think it's about
time.
exhausted at this point. I
A
just think
pickle and a peach. I
the
don't know,
only thing
it's
I
kinda
have to say for
interesting.
this is I think that at least the pickle suit does have the advantage of being like a cautionary tale about sexually transmitted infections. Also, you can work
This
on
is
more than
what
one.
it looks
This is
like.
what you could end up like.
Green and dimply. I mean, I
It's
don't
not
know.
just a punishment; it's a
Yeah.
cautionary tale.
Exactly. And I feel like. Oh my gosh. They can
Is
even have different.
is she still on camera? Even
She's fallen.
she's like curving back over the.
Oh man. Can you just picture it like driving to your Cirque du Soleil show and just
Why are you going to Cirque
I'm thinking of like Vegas, like where there's a lot, and they're trying to deter, they're trying to rebrand as a, family friendly.
Take us from Genesee County, which I'll say this again, I don't know anything about this, but one would assume that the quality of prostitution is quite different. Genesee County, Michigan versus Vegas. So I'm glad you took us.
Yes.
Glad you took us to Vegas.
Taking it up a notch.
Let me clarify. I know I'm not at all expert or informed on the matter.
All right.
Let's talk about
speaking of
suffering.
pain and suffering.
Yeah.
Speaking of STIs, let's talk about
Pain and
suffering.
suffering.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
The deep burn.
What are we talking about?
I don't know.
Theodicy. We're talking about theodicy.
Should we pick these papers up?
I already moved mine. I'm ahead.
Oh, you're awesome.
I'm just top of the class over here.
Oh gosh, we're never gonna make it through. How are we gonna transition?
You know what?
pain
I get
and
into a
suffering?
situation. What do you have a thought?
Oh, okay.
Let me ask you this.
Okay.
Do you have a thought, like when you're in a serious? This happens.
Yeah.
I remember this. I remember a time this happened where I was answering questions in front of the whole church, and I made a comment. I said, like, sometimes we and I was talking to Tyler. He was out sitting at the Y, and I was like, well, sometimes we compare each other to other churches. Like that church up the road has a bigger organ.
What?
Organ, like pipe organ. That's what I meant. And he's sitting out in the midst of the Y, and he just goes, when I say it, I thought, geez. And I look at him and he goes,
I was just like,
oh, you said it. Yep. And then, so then, what do you think at that point to get control?
You're talking about your
I don't
liver.
Do you have a thought that your go-to that's like, I need to get control of the laughter,
like
I need to bring in whatever.
something.
Yes, that's it.
So that
That's
kind
it.
of
So like for me, it's like,
moment.
remember when your dog died. Remember when your dog died. Remember when your dog died.
Yes, 100%.
Like that,
yes.
that kind of
Yes.
like, it's just like your go-to. Do you have one? Yours has to do with your grandma, it sounds like. Well, cat's out of the bag, grandma. Sorry.
Does your grandmother know that?
No, actually, it's our 90th birthday.
Oh, happy birthday,
Saturday.
Sarah's
We're
grandma.
going there. Shout out Minerva, Ohio, everybody.
What?
We're coming on Saturday.
You're going to Minerva.
Yeah, we're going.
What's your grandma's name?
Dolores.
Happy birthday,
Happy
Dolores.
It's a great name for a 90-year-old.
I mean,
Yeah.
she's the best. She hasn't aged a day since I was born. And then it was,
Nuts.
Just saying something.
yeah,
'cause
100%.
She was in her 50s.
She's amazing.
So,
That is fabulous. No.
you have a thought, Christy? What's your go-to for?
I just lose control.
There's no
thoughts.
There's no
nothing.
thought.
thoughts.
You
just
gotta find a
laughter.
naked grandma. I mean, your version.
Wait, your grandma's naked in this?
Like, hey, get your own grandma. No.
So at my wedding, I don't know how to tell this story well.
Oh boy. I mean, here's the
My-
thing. Most of the content is not making it out to the internet.
Okay,
so
great.
at this point.
It's good.
So my best
Austin
friend
makes
had
it
made up a mantra for me. I was a little nervous about getting married. And so then,
Seth doesn't know this story.
no, he does. Okay. So then my maid of honor was my best friend who had given me a mantra the night before. And when she went to give a speech, she was like, she said this stuff about Seth, blah, 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 whatever, like he's great. And Christy, if there's one thing I want to tell you, and I thought it was going to be the mantra, which was not appropriate. And I just go, not that! And we both just did that noise that I had made for 5 minutes. It just no one
Like
has
at
any
your
idea
reception.
Nobody else
what
even
else
knows
was
what's going on, and you two are
we
just rolling.
wheezing. And then at
Oh
the
my
end, she's
gosh.
like, I don't remember what I was going to say.
And then, do you know how terrible that is?
That was it.
Like, as an audience member, like, no closure.
Right.
Like, I gotta know, what was the thing she was gonna say? Nah, I don't
All
even
your
know.
aunts and uncles.
All right,
You can
go
tell
get
me.
the chicken
I was like,
or
not that.
whatever.
And she goes, I wasn't going to say that. And
Oh
it
my
was,
gosh.
Oh my gosh. So, yeah, no, the short story, no.
No mantras.
I can't. If I'm
can't.
laughing, there's no stopping it.
It's gone.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tonight, we do make a transition to a little heavier topic, which is the problem of theodicy And
I had never heard that word before.
define
Thank
that
you.
for
Never heard the
us for
word. I
viewers
can.
that may
I'm
not
happy to.
know?
In fact, that's a part of what I was getting
fabulous.
ready to do.
You're
The
ahead of the
Odyssey.
game.
So if you think about the problem in as simple a form as you can, it's three-pronged. The first is if God is all powerful and God is all loving and God is love, then why is there suffering? Or why do bad things happen to good people? Or why do bad things happen at all?
Period.
Like that might be another. So if God is all powerful and God is loving, then why do bad things happen
Gotcha.
in the world? Like that's the kind of general framework. And the problem most of the time is that for us to answer that question, we basically have to caveat what we mean by one part or another. To say, well, God's all powerful, but here's what we mean by that. There's this limitation on God's power that means that there's still suffering. Or that, God's loving, but not like that loving. Like there's some sort of limitation on that. So a lot of times there's no way around answering the question that we don't end up kind of caveating it. But I came up with like a selection to make this a little easier. I came up with kind of like a short rundown.
Can I ask a question about the
Yeah.
theodicy?
Yeah.
So is that specific to that problem, or is it just in general like the problem of evil or suffering?
Yeah,
Or is
that's
it
the same term.
specific,
That's the
like-
same
it's
term.
the same term.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
the same thing. We're circling the same kind of drain with
Okay.
these terms
All
and
right.
that thinking. So we'll come around a little bit to why this becomes such an obstacle for people, but I think it's important to just start with the premise of like, what are we talking about and where are we at when it comes to some of that, because that may inform some of what we come to later. So, so if God is all powerful and God is love, why do bad things happen? Why is there suffering? So you can just jump in if one of these, I have about 5 or 6 answers that have been given in different forms, and a lot of people are like combinations of different, whatever. So one answer is that suffering or evil occurs as a result of human bad choices. So this is one of the favorite ones that I grew up with, was like, well, bad stuff happens because we make bad choices and there are consequences to that. And sometimes in Christian thought, that's been tied in some circles distinctly to one set of bad choices. Like Adam and Eve did, they made a bad choice. And so all this suffering enters the world because of their bad choice. I remember when Amy gave birth to one of our kids, and, she's in just after the travails of labor, and the nurse kind of comes along and wipes her brow and is like, well, it's hard. It's all Eve's fault.
No.
That kind of thing. And,
Nice.
And I knew
Good
where she was
timing.
coming from.
Yeah.
I knew what she was saying, but at the time I was also like, that feels like an inadequate explanation of what just happened
And
here.
not helpful.
Yeah. Well, it didn't. I don't know that. I'd have to ask. I don't even know if Amy heard it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that would be one explanation: suffering or evil as a result of choices. Another example would be that God permits or uses suffering to refine people and to shape them or believe them, and maybe some cases also to sort them out, the faithful from the not faithful. Like how we respond to things can shape us, or it can make us who we're supposed to be, or it can kind of have a sifting effect of those who are righteous in the face of suffering. They persist through that, and other people who are crushed, there's something else about them that's flawed. So, I think, excuse me, I think people like Martin Luther end up really starting to push back against that. When you think of like suicide, Luther's one of the first people who, in the modern Christian era, who's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Like, nobody I know, this is Luther talking, who has committed suicide did it because they were like a less faithful Christian. They did it because his terminology seems like they're as overcome like a person in a dark alley by a thief. Like that's more his observation of things. So he doesn't subscribe to that. But so yeah, does God permit suffering to shape us, to refine us, or to sort us from those who are faithful and unfaithful? Another explanation: suffering occurs because it's the best possible conditions in the world in which we live for our freedom. So in other words, God created a world in which the best possible circumstances for us to be free agents included a kind of essential amount of suffering in that order. But it's the best possible world we could get because God is love, and God created the best possible for us to both be free and make free choices and exist in a world of freedom. But it does come with these kind of essential drawbacks that include evil, the potential for evil, but also some suffering involved as well. Another option, number 4. I don't think suffering is real. This is known as the Lost thesis. If you think of the TV show Lost,
Gotcha.
there comes a point, I don't want to spoil this for anyone who didn't watch the end of the show 15 years ago, but like the end of the show, it was all sort of like they've been in a purgatory and none of the suffering was actually real, and they've all actually been dead since the plane went down. And so there can be, and I'm a little sympathetic to this actually, that like there's nothing more real than the good in the world. That the suffering, the evil, the pain, the brokenness is just like privations of those good things. But
Can you define privations?
privation would be like, that's a term that comes from Augustine's thought, and it's the description of like any sin or evil being rooted not in a bad desire, but the desire itself is good. So like the desire to be loved is a good desire. When you desire to be loved in certain ways that violate your relationships with other people, it then becomes sin, right? Like it has the good desire has moved into a place that has become malformed or a privation of the good. So anyway, like in that world, in that way of thinking, you could say, well, a lot of the suffering and evil, it's just like malformed goods, and it's not really real in the way that like the good is real, and whatever's true and beautiful and lovely is real, and everything else is just kind of like a warped matter of our perspective. Taken to the farthest degree, you end up with something like Christian Science, which is like, you're not really sick. That's just a state of mind. Sure. Like tell that to the person who's dying of cancer. It's not really that helpful. So I'm sympathetic in a way, but at the end of the day, it can become very much about like, it's just a state of mind. And a 5th way would be, I don't think the answer is knowable. So then the question is, well, is that a cop-out? So, okay, you got like 4 or 5 options.
Yeah.
What do we think?
I think first we have to start with just like recognizing that we're not going to add anything to this conversation.
No, probably not. It's been going on a long time.
like we've been talking about this one for a while, just in the history of human.
And I think our purpose is more to like get through this part and then talk about why it goes wrong and harms community, like in what ways.
Sure.
But so yes, we're not going to add.
Right.
We've look the names we've brought out: Augustine,
nice.
Luther.
Yeah.
Like we're not going to do
Some
better.
heavy hitters.
We're not going to do better than these
Welcome
people.
to the podcast, folks. We're going to solve this one for you real quick.
I actually brought a quote from my favorite Christian mystic of the 20th century.
Okay.
So I'm going to read it though, so I don't. So I do her justice. So it's the great Madeleine L'Engle.
Okay.
Who is actually, a lot of people don't know, a Christian mystic and a great author.
And who wrote books like
A Wrinkle in Time.
Wrinkle in Time, that's what was coming to mind for me.
A Swiftly Tilting Planet. A Ring of Endless Light, which is great for young readers if you want to believe that you could talk to dolphins telepathically.
His kid does a spot-on dolphin. Anyway, go on.
It's great.
It sounds a lot like when you were gasping for breath earlier,
Just
Christy.
like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
A lot alike.
So the quote goes this way, and I think it kind of does some combination of what you're talking about. I do not believe that God wills cancer or multiple sclerosis. I do not believe that we are ever to regard the brutal death of a child as God's will. I only know that El, and for people that don't know, Elohim, the word for God, can come into whatever happens, and by being part of it, can return it to wholeness. This is a large part of the meaning of incarnation. Nothing ever happens to us alone. It happens to God, too. And so I think for me, well, one, I'm going to say, like, I don't have an answer. right? Like, not really. But one of the things we talked about with one of my favorite professors was like God's self-limiting factor, where he is all powerful, but he has also given us the ability to make choices and therefore does self-limitation. But for me, it's that incarnation piece where I do believe that most of it's from our bad decisions. So I guess maybe kind of in that like best possible scenario for us to both have free will, live freely, and also God be all loving. And that's one of the reasons we need Jesus to come actually be incarnate.
So I want to embrace what you're saying, because I think that I'm going to land in a very similar place. On the way there, I'm going to throw this nugget out for another podcast. I'm really free will dubious.
Yeah, we talked about that.
I think I've thrown that out before, but I think that's a podcast conversation another time. I just think, how many decisions do we make that we look back on and we thought at the time, oh, I knew exactly what I was doing. And you look back and you're like, I had no idea what I was doing. You know, we had a child.
Well, and there's also just like how many of our decisions are electricity and chemicals all sloshing around in our brain. So the argument can be made, like
pheromones and unmet emotional need adds up to a lot
decisions. Sure. But I think God meets us in all of that.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
That's the good news of grace to me, is that we don't have to be able. I think we have to always be able to say, I did that. Even if the explanation is pheromones and unmet emotional need, we still have to be able to say, I did that, but God is still present in this, and God is still with me, and God is still with these other people, and there is grace. So anyway, okay, throw that aside. I just wanted to get that out there.
No, I appreciate it.
Because I feel like I encounter too many pastoral situations that like that free will pops up as the explanation for everything, and also it's like not always helpful for people to figure out how to move forward. So, and it doesn't always seem to be like a great explanation for how stuff happens either. Like, did you really choose that, or did you just back into it? Like a lot of the most problematic stuff, we kind of like all of a sudden we're like,
you're not consciously saying,
all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, how'd I get here?
You just
and then you're
around.
there. Right. It seems, all of a sudden you're walking out with 15 packets of chapstick from Walmart, and the next thing you know, you're washing a car. And you're like, how did this happen? What? I didn't choose to do this. So, okay. So back to L'Angle. I like the idea, though, of the God with us component of that. And I think where I end up falling is very much in the, like, I don't know an answer, but I do think the only satisfactory response that Christian theology makes is God's going to show up and share in it. Yeah. So, but that being said, there's still like lots of variations of things. You mentioned that our choice can have consequences of suffering. That seems like obvious. I think we all probably would say, yeah, our choices can create suffering.
Right. But I also see where you're saying, like, for example, say a parent is abusive and they were abused. Like, how, if they think they're doing better, like, I'm not trying to excuse any kind of abuse whatsoever, but like, how much did they choose and how much was almost programmed into them? So I can also see where you're coming from.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that are intergenerational.
Sure.
So addiction, abuse, all kinds of emotional cycles and repeated traumas can fall into that category of we're just acting out the script we were given.
Right. And that's why being a cycle breaker is difficult.
Yeah.
Doable, but difficult.
Well, and it's why at some point, like, again, we're kind of going back to the free will and grace concept, but it's where the grace has to come in to help interrupt. Like, at some point, you just have to be like, look, we are all really messed up.
Yeah.
And that's not the answer for every situation, because the grace does have to really interrupt abuse if there's abuse or cycles of addiction. It has to say no more of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, what other, so I'm going back to those kind of categories. what others of those have resonance? Our choices can create some of that. Are there any other categories that have resonance?
So, sorry, Tyler. I feel like I'm
No, you're good.
hogging the conversation.
No, this is interesting.
One of my previous pastors, and it was a great new way for me to look at things. He talked about in the restoration of all things that suffering becomes untrue. Like, so not just that, like, oh, things are okay now, we wipe away every tear, but at the very end, when all things are made new, like, it actually has a retroactive effect where it, like, unmakes the suffering. It kind of like, so I guess that would be in the not really real, but I also, like, I don't want to say that because it's not, I would never want to undermine someone's suffering, but just the idea, and I still don't know exactly where I fall on it, but like the idea of it becoming untrue at the very end. I feel like it's a beautiful idea. Obviously, who knows? But yeah, and the other thing that I did want to share, that I wanted to make sure to share, is I had a friend in college and we were talking about this, and I was like, why would God create the world in the first place? Like, he knew he was going to send himself to sacrifice, like, make this giant sacrifice, have all of this suffering in the world, like, and I just had never found a decent answer for it ever. And he goes, I don't know, but all I know is it must have been worth it. And, like, that has been one thing I've been able to, like, just rest on. Like, I trust God. I trust that he is all good. I trust that he's all loving. And he must have decided that it was worth all of it.
Well, the one thing I would throw out in the midst of that particular kind of stream of thought is that it was good even before whatever the Christian view of, like, who Jesus is. Like, it was good before that. At the get-go, it was good.
It was good.
So there is this is something I can say because I'm a Methodist and I don't have a problem with this. But like in the Louis Armstrong, What a Wonderful World, there is something profoundly true about that. That we don't have to be like uncomfortable or reject. It's like, no, you listen to that song and it's just like, no, this is true. There's more than this to the story. Yeah. But this is also totally true. So I like that I like the perspective, too, that kind of holds in tension that in the midst of all of the suffering, pain, evil, tears, that there's also just, like, such profound goodness and beauty present that is not diminished by the existence of the rest of that. I like the idea of all of the story of whatever is moving towards a day when, at least perhaps retroactively, the suffering is done away with, or maybe even remembered in a way at a particular point in time that there's a different perspective, that it's held in a perspective that we can't really achieve now. But I say that with a lot of humility, thinking of like terrible historical things that have happened in my pastoral experience with families and stuff that are just like, to this day, I can't like think about some of these situations and be like, well, someday it will be okay.
Right.
It's not.
Absolutely.
It's
Well,
not
I think
okay.
that's where you have to like have this conversation with two different minds. One with like the real emotional mind of what we've experienced or know people who have experienced something, and the intellectual exercise that is the origin of evil or the problem of evil and bad and suffering in the world. It's like you almost have to, I don't know, you almost have to approach it in two very different ways. Kind of like what you said. You're like, I would never say that, right?
Yeah.
Someone who's like in the throes of their emotional experience of suffering and be like, well,
one day,
asterisk, you know what I mean? It's like, because that doesn't help. That's not helpful in the moment.
Sure.
And I think and maybe this is kind of going a different direction of where you wanted to go with it, of like the problem with the typical responses within the church is that they're responses that I think come from a theological or intellectual exercise and not a real emotional, relational vein, I guess.
Say more about that.
It's easy to say free will or original sin or Revelation 21, all, the new heaven and new earth, and all I guess, like, thoughts and prayers. I guess these these sort
the
of
theological version of thoughts and prayers.
Yeah. It's like everything happens for a reason. All these like sort of just we're just like throwing these little thought grenades into people's emotional experience, and it's like that's it. It doesn't feel helpful because I think the reality is most people don't wrestle with this question until they're in a truly emotional state, unless they enjoy it, right? Like we have these sort of thoughts and Read Aquinas and, blah, blah, blah. But it's like most people are at a funeral and they're struggling with this thought in that moment, right? And so
in
those
that
answers
moment,
aren't helpful in that
well,
moment.
I think it depends. So in that moment, do we want... So I agree with we don't necessarily want a technical answer.
Yeah.
I think the thing I see being the struggle of faith community is, do we want a simplistic answer that gives me an explanation for why this happened? Or are we wanting something that is defying of that says there can't be a simple answer to this? And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Okay.
I would agree that, like, I don't think it's ever been helpful unless somebody asks the question about their suffering to me as a pastor, for me to be like, well, here's what Augustine would say about that. Like, don't do that. That's not smart. Like, you have to kind of be informed by it so that you can interact with people around their kind of notions that can do damage, maybe. Yeah. But I think when most people hit that crisis, what do they want? Do they want something that's a clear, yes, there's an answer, there's a reason for why this happened, and this is why there's suffering in the world and why this happened to you? Or do they want not that? Do they want this kind of like shroud of mystery and we can't really know and it's complicated? And does that honor and acknowledge their suffering or pain more? What do you think people want?
I think it depends on the person, which feels like a cop-out answer, but like I 100% think it depends on the person. Like for me, I don't want the simplistic answer. You come at me with everything happens for a reason, and no. Like we're just gonna no. But like my mother, that's comforting to her. And so it reminds me of a scene in the TV series Christie. I don't know if y'all have ever seen it. Is it about
you?
It's not. It's spelled wrong.
Oh, okay.
So also set in, late 1700s,
Is it just
early
your
1800s.
Twitch stream?
My Twitch stream. And in it,
hey fam.
Hey fam. I'm here in the Smoky Mountains in the early 1800s.
Oh, that would be a twist.
Just saying, no one has ever seen me and the character Christy in the room at the same time.
At the same time. They haven't. They haven't.
Christy fans
so
out
on
there.
On this episode, there's an elderly woman who is on her deathbed, and her husband had passed before her. And there's a new reverend, like he's green, real green, and he's come to visit her.
I've resembled this remark at some point in my life.
Resembled this remark before, and she said, like, what happens when I die? Like, will I see my husband? Will I, like, what's going to happen? And bless his heart, he starts going into all the different theories about soul sleep, about instantaneous, like all these things. And she's so sweet, and she just like grabs his hand and she's like, Pastor, when an old woman asks you what's going to happen when she dies, like, this is not what she's looking for. She doesn't want your theological theories. Like, she wants comforted. And
Christy, I had a conversation not too long ago, which I thought, well, this went well. But I have a good answer to this, or a question to this now. If somebody says, because this is a question you get, and I accidentally did a smart thing. I had somebody say, well, what do you think that's like? And I said, so what was it like when you met the Lord? Like when you came to know that God was real in your life? And this person said, well, I just was at a church service and I felt like this hand just reached down for me and pulled me to the front, and not anybody to the right or the left, but just me. And I couldn't figure it out. And to this day, I can't tell you exactly what happened. And I said, well, it's probably going to be about like that. And
So
Good,
you
that's
them
good.
with
you
their
just-
own
yeah,
story
to
sort of
say,
fill in what that
I don't
is.
know.
Yeah.
I've never been there, but like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
the that's what better can you do than that? I would agree. I've never found it to be particularly. I'll be like, well, then there's this theory of what we
Right,
do,
right.
or then there's this theory.
Yeah.
It's I think probably better to say, well, what do you think? What do you expect to see?
And also, I think situation is huge, right? Someone on their deathbed is different than like, oh, we're all sitting around and having like an in-depth biblical conversation, sort of more from an intellectual standpoint. I think those are two totally different approaches.
Sure.
But I think also people want truth. People want to know that, hey, at least you know, or at least you think you know, especially I think as a pastor, people are coming to you for like true, clear answers.
Well, Christy, haven't you experienced at some point being in a church where it's like every, not here, every,
Not here.
although there's some of this, but every Sunday the pastor's like, well, I don't really know, like what I'm talking about, and I have a
Booze
problem
and
with
hisses
it.
rain down
Like I
from
feel like
the
I've heard you
crowd.
talk about that kind of like approach in preaching at some point where that you've seen where it's like. I've probably done it at some point where like every week I'm trying to figure something out myself. So
I think it's what I've experienced was a little different than that. I probably wasn't clear enough about what it was like to be under someone deconstructing. But I can appreciate that if it's like I don't know and I'm wrestling with
Yeah.
this. I guess if it was every week, that might get a little.
I think that's my
that
point.
Would be,
I would like a little humility in the preaching to be like, we don't know about this big issue. I don't know. Like,
Right.
but here's what I do know. Like that kind of thing.
exactly. And so
Kind of that old lady's point. Like you have one job.
one job
Like
right now.
your one job is to just give me a little bit of hope about whatever's coming. So I'm hearing a lot of it depends on the person.
Yeah.
I think so, and situationally, because I
Yeah,
think a
definitely. I
deathbed's
think
different
situational.
than like
Yeah.
someone diagnosed with cancer or something like
Right.
that. You know,
or
who's
someone
really
asking
trying to-
you in a not necessarily good faith conversation,
That's
right?
true.
This is often used as sort of a gotcha for Christians.
Yeah.
Of, well, what about whatever
When
Greek,
it's like-
came up with the idea in the first place, right? If God is all loving, then he can't be all powerful. And if he's all powerful, he can't be all loving, blah, blah, blah.
So
And
Christianity is
so-
all about holding tension in two
So
things.
I
friends.
think, yeah, how is this even, I guess, brought up is
So I think I've not experienced it necessarily brought. I think I've had good faith things where people come and are like, look, this is the thing I can't reconcile. Like I'm not going to come to church or whatever because this thing happened in my life, and I just don't know how that could be the case. But aside from that, I can think of lots of times where in one direction or the other, the answer to this problem caused people to check out of the faith community. So I think back to a guy I knew who he talked about how after 9/11, what happened in the week after 9/11 in a lot of places, at least in Indiana, was that tons of people showed up to church the next few weeks.
Yeah.
Right.
And in a service in one of those churches, this guy talked to me at one point about, he's like, I went to the church and I really liked the preacher and I really liked the pastor. But then that Sunday, he talked about how this terrorist attack had happened and God had no plan in it. That it was just people who made bad choices that were destructive and harmful and evil, but that there was no point. He's like, I believe everything happens for a reason. How could all these people have died and God not had a plan for that?
Yeah.
And he's like, I never went back.
And then down the road, the other preacher is saying, this is God's judgment.
Right.
On whatever.
You know what I mean? And so
And-
the
and-
response to this question is important.
It's
Yeah.
almost a few years later, I remember being in a
Katrina.
Sunday evening church service where a young preacher talked about Hurricane Katrina,
say Katrina was a
and was
big
like,
one.
this
Yeah.
was judgment
New
on the Gulf
Orleans.
Coast, and it's about God's judgment on gambling and human sexuality, and like the list
Yes.
went on and on. And I mean, it was like, I remember I was only like 22, 21, and I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, that's how it just did not work for me
Right.
Yeah.
as a viable explanation. So I think, is it possible that we just live in a world where more and more we're breaking into groups of people who either want the simple, tell me why this is happening, don't overcomplicate it, don't talk Augustine to me, just tell me God has a plan. Or people who are like, if you tell me God has a plan, I'm going to think that you're trying to sell me something. Like there's got to be more nuance, and there's not a clear explanation like that.
In your experience, has it been divided by age at all? Like, I feel like the younger generation, we grew up postmodern, right? And so
Are you throwing us in that? The younger generation?
I am.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm around kids all day.
I'm going boomers.
And I have kids,
Gen
so
X
I'm thinking,
is
when I
kind
think
of like
young,
the
I'm
line,
like, okay, all right.
Gen X, I feel like, can go either way.
Yeah.
Because they're an awesome generation. We love Gen X. They get left out so much. But I feel like generally...
I've never heard of that generation. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
Sorry. Get it. They get left out.
So what I would
like,
say,
younger people tend to be... like, we grew up in a... Truth can be subjective, et cetera, et cetera. And we're like, okay, well, there's more nuance to this versus like a hard line. But I don't know if that plays out.
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, I think there are a lot of older adults that I've known, and a lot of them are dead now. Like, they're not even just older. They're like, they've been gone for 20 years, who, like, life teaches you that there are not easy explanations for suffering, and that people accumulate a real wisdom about that kind of stuff. It's possible, and a nuance about that kind of stuff. And I think you develop an awareness that whatever evil and suffering is in the world, it can be kind of capricious. It doesn't seem to have a rhyme or reason. Like, sometimes the best people have all of a sudden a terrible car accident or a terrible diagnosis, and you're like, there cannot be justice in the world because of it. And sometimes the worst people just have the best luck again and again and again, and it's incredible. And you're like, how does this happen? So I think the longer some people live, the more they accumulate that. I wonder, though, if what has changed generationally is our willingness to stick in a community where everybody's answers aren't ours. And so, like, some of these folks I can think of that are older, but they have this kind of wisdom and sagacity about, like, how the world works and all that. Like, they can tolerate somebody up in front preaching a sermon that's like, this is why this happens. And they can sit there and be like, okay, maybe. That's a nice explanation. I'll just put that in my file.
And not immediately go on Facebook and be like,
what a stupid sermon. Or whatever.
This guy's terrible. Sorry, I don't know why I was Trump.
It's that voice.
It was the voice.
Yeah, well.
Terrible sermon.
Yeah, worst sermon ever. Fake news.
You're getting canceled.
I've got a shoe right
Cancel
there.
culture.
There's a shoe and it's about to hit you.
terrible. Cancel Glenn. Sorry. Okay. I'm done.
Anyway, I think that's what's happening.
Yeah.
I think we've just gotten less capacity generationally to just stick with it when we just are like, you're out of your mind. That doesn't mean, though, that those things don't do damage. Like, you got to really pay attention to where people are at, because sometimes somebody needs to know that this means something.
Yeah.
Now, I can't tell you what it means, but, like, if you're sure that it does, then it's not probably my job, even as your pastor, to be like, no, it doesn't mean anything. There's just suffering. We can't know. Like, don't do that to people. Even if you don't know.
Yeah.
So,
do you think, and just to clarify, I think I probably fall in the first category, sort of the original sin, like 95% of suffering is just because we live in a messed up world and we're messed up.
Yeah.
And we're a cause of that. I think there is like a 5% that God will use a specific event to really try and grab a hold or grab someone's attention, sort of in a unique way. But I think most of the suffering that we experience in mass is just because of the chaotic, crazy world that we live in, and that we're heading towards a trajectory of restoration there is an ultimate end, but in the moment, we got to sort of just, push through it.
So,
I guess.
so what you're kind of describing is something I embrace wholeheartedly, which is, the technical terminology would be a low anthropology.
Yes,
Like,
I'm very
humans
low
are not
anthropologically.
humans are not great. Okay, like we're scared. There's this great riff in Men in Black that Tommy Lee Jones gives about like humans are scared, stupid, selfish, skittish creatures that like. Yeah, I think I kind of agree with that. I think even our best and most noble efforts, we have to interrogate because they are shot through with our own self-aggrandizement and selfishness. And I think it's there. So when you threw out the term original sin,
I cringed hard.
Why did you cringe hard, Christy?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think I have a higher anthropology.
Which is cool.
Because of Imago Dei.
Yeah.
Like if God's putting his image on us, I think he called us good.
I didn't mean we were bad.
Sure. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But I also don't disagree that humans have capacity for just the worst and the lowest.
So I think you articulated well like a pushback to what I said, which is let's not diminish the goodness of humanity as we talk about that. Oh no. I think humans are incredible and like this is one of my favorite parts of being a pastor is not the decent or Christian part. It's the like observation of human nature at work when people are capable at the same people on the same day of being incredibly selfless and focused on others and then doing petty, small, selfish stuff. Like within the same hour, they can swing back and forth between both. Luke's smiling because like this is like everything I do is stuck on these pendulums of like one moment he says something very selfless, and the next moment you're like, I can't believe they ordained this guy.
You mean you're human?
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of folks who would have a critique of that would say, we don't want to lay like a burden of guilt on children that they haven't earned themselves good and decent yet. And I actually would just say, I think it's kind of helpful to me as a person. It's been my experience that it's been helpful to be like, you know what? There's no way you're going to get out of this doing it right.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. But I think growing up hearing you're dirty and you're sinful and like that
and you're bad
I think that has caused so much damage. And then also just like I have a friend who is a great mother. I mean, fabulous, but her daughter was like, I don't know, 6 months old or something, and she's like, oh, the sin nature's really already starting to show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, or her brain is developing.
Yeah.
Like, and we know so much more about child development now and what the brain has to go through. So like, people look at toddlers and they're like, oh, they're obstinate and they're sinful. And I'm like, their brain is turning into goo and remolding.
So one thing you like,
but just because the science can explain it doesn't necessarily mean where does it come from.
So okay.
If there is bad and good,
let me circle in on something like
other.
a terminology that Christy used that kind of like throws insight into more a tradition we both come from that makes this problematic, which is to think about whatever is broken in us as something that can be surgically removed. And so there is a tradition of Christian thought, in particularly the holiness movement, which comes from Methodism. It's not distinctly Methodist, but a lot of Methodists thought like this at a time too, which is that like whatever's broken and selfish in you as a disposition, God can just remove that bent towards the sin, and you can live without sin in your life, at least
you can be
willful
truly
knowledge.
sanctified.
Yeah, right. That maybe you'll still make mistakes because you don't know all the information about a situation, or because of infirmity in some way, you might make a mistake, like if you're sick or you're tired or whatever. But that basically this part of you can be removed, and I'm dubious of that, and I don't think that makes humans worse. Like I just think we're like never like we're whole people. or there's not like a part of us that's broken and a part of us that's whole, and we just need part of that self removed. No, like we're a whole picture, we're a whole person that happens to be a part of a historic web of relations that's like really messed up, and like none of our families are perfect, none of the experiences that whatever, like, so
Exactly.
when I think of the term of original sin, I mean whatever is going on in humanity that means we all have that at play. Yes,
That I can get on board with.
what I don't mean is let's shame people for really any of the things that I'm not convinced that shame is a helpful motivator for us to grow in any direction ever, hardly. So like
It's a good
even if it's
behavior
washing cars to
modifier.
keep you away from
Pickle
shoplifting
Pickle
and pickle
suits.
suits or whatever,
Pay for your
I'm not
car.
sure
Yeah.
it's an effective motivator to really be better.
Yeah.
So that's like the historical kind of
Yeah.
piece where your friend talks about the sin nature rising up, or like I remember we had some family that they meant it facetiously and to be funny, but they'd say, I'm going to beat the carnal nature out of that child or whatever. they're making that same reference to
Right.
this, like, whatever part of them's sinful and broken, we're going to fix that. I think it's more complicated than that, but anyway, sorry. I just wanted
Yeah.
to.
You are, well, I think what might be helpful to know, and this would be a deeper conversation for later, is I don't know that I believe that Adam and Eve are like historical figures.
Yeah, sure. But even if they are representative, the story represents that, or at least ends with, we are no longer in a perfect garden, and
Sure.
evil does exist, right?
I
Even
would-
if it is
yeah,
just
I'd
an
agree.
allegory of,
But I'm not sure that I would
life.
agree that a baby is born necessarily with a sin nature. I think there's a lot of environmental factors that play on there that
Sure.
would bring in bad decisions, etc.
But the Adam and Eve narrative could be it could be a description of the context in which we find ourselves with those environmental factors,
Sure.
right? Like that would be the way I think I would most relate to the truth of the story, is
Right.
that like it's a very good description of how the desire for something that's not bad actually breaks open this situation in our midst, even to
Yeah.
this day, where this is kind of calling out on Augustine again, and that privation of this. It wasn't bad to want the apple, to know good from evil. That wasn't bad. It was just that it moved beyond the bounds of the relational dynamics that were at play. And that is more than predictive of everything to come or determinative of everything to come. It is descriptive of everything that is going to happen.
And I think talking about the harm in community, where I see like that original sin causing harm in several different ways, but the big one I think of is like people that are just heartbroken when their baby dies before baptism, or their young child dies, or whatever, and they're just convinced that like, their child is either in purgatory or in hell, like whatever their belief system is, and that just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Like that, because that they have that so deeply held that like before you confess, you can know, or some people come up with an age of accountability,
which would be
or
like-
Which is
whatever.
another thing that
Grace,
you're
right?
kind of
But-
calling
Sort of
back
falls
to
in-
another problematic thing about the terminology
Sure.
of original sin.
Right.
Which is, if this is there, it needs a remedy
Yes.
before a remedy of grace in some way for us to experience salvation. And again, one thing that's
Oh,
fortunate.
you're getting choked up. This is so
I-
beautiful. God.
It could be the tuberculosis that I've been wrestling.
Oh, okay.
One thing that I'm thankful to be a part of is a tradition that like doesn't spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah.
That concern of like, no, like there's grace at work in your kid's life.
Exactly.
From the time they're born, and this, and we don't baptize children to erase the guilt of original sin. We baptize them to acknowledge the Spirit being poured out in their life and God's grace at work going before us, leading us to knowledge and awareness of God. But those are all. I feel like we should have had a separate conversation on original
Yeah.
sin. But I think those are all really good.
It's hard not to have.
It touches so many things.
Yeah, it's hard to have the conversation of the problem of evil without, I guess,
Without
talking
going
about
back to that, because it's
yeah.
such a prolific explanation about that. So, So I wonder, have we had experiences that for us push us towards one or the other of the kind of needs? You referenced this earlier, Christy, saying if somebody comes at me with the God's involved in everything, I'm going to be like, no. Have you had an experience that pushed you in that direction? Or conversely, have you had experiences, because I don't know that you necessarily answered which way you fell, that pushed you in a, no, I got to have, I need to keep searching until I find out what it was that God was up to in this. Like, have we had experiences like that inform what we need out of that conversation? Like what kind of clarity or lack thereof we need?
I mean, yes, a lot.
Any you'd be willing to talk about on a podcast? I was about to say,
some things I'm willing to talk on the podcast and some things I'm not. I think one thing that was big into it, because I was probably more towards everything happens for a reason, younger, because it was simple, it made sense. And then my blessed grandmother, who helped raise me and was like a pillar in the community and so many great things. She was diagnosed with cancer. She beat it. It came back and it took her. And she was 63, which is not old. And like, she was basically my rock growing up. She was my best friend. And like, I watched her die, like through a whole year. I just watched her degrade and become a shell of a person. And it changed me, like it did. And if I honestly thought that like God ordained that, I don't know that I would have come out of it a Christian. Now, do I think God was in it? Do I think God was there with us? Absolutely. Do I think God uses everything? Yes. I think, what, oh gosh, I don't remember the actual reference, but what Satan meant for evil, God used for good. So I think that there can be a redemptive quality in everything. But that was definitely a very hard thing for me to come to terms with. And it wasn't just like, she was so good, like, why did a bad thing happen to a good person? It was much more, like, personal to me, like, why did you take her?
I remember, Christy, up at Potato Creek State Park, there's a cemetery there, and in the middle of the cemetery, all the graves in a lot of historical cemeteries are laid out with the headstones, and so the people are facing the east. Awaiting the expectation was that when Christ returned, he would come from the eastern sky, especially in that. Gotcha. So you go down to the St. Joe Center, the Parker Cemetery down here. They're laid out that way. They're all facing.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this was true. It's pretty ubiquitous across. Yeah. It doesn't in our modern cemeteries. They don't do this, but as much. Anyway, in the middle of the cemetery, there's a little girl named Emma Porter, and she is buried perpendicular to everybody else. And the story on that was that there was no, like, the kind of prevailing thought of the time was, well, God took her. And there was no other, like, room for another explanation. And so her father purchased 3 plots and buried her sideways. Because at the coming of Christ, he wanted nothing to do with the one who would take her like that. Like, that was wow. And so, like, when there's no flex or there's no durability in the ability of people to, like, process their grief, you end up with, like, I'm out, thank you. Yeah, which is kind of what you were saying. If there was only that explanation, the faith might not have held intact or continued to grow or whatever.
Which also, I mean, can we just acknowledge that, like, there's such a beauty in the church and that there's a space for all of the denominations, I guess, sort of to have their own take, I guess, because I think there is a place for everyone, whether whichever, I guess, of the 5 that you prescribe to of an explanation for the problem of evil. There is a church. There's a community that would, I guess, still keep Christ as a central figure, but would explain this in a very different way.
All of those I read are all present in our faith community.
All through,
Yeah,
They're all of them, and in decent
That
numbers.
one's pretty
Yeah.
personal. Like many people have different thoughts. I don't feel like I hear it from the pulpit much. Do you know what I mean? So
Oh,
it's
like I don't
not-
present a paradigm.
And most people, I don't think most pastors do unless you have a Katrina or you have a.
Well,
like,
and
when
I
you
would
get-
I would not want to present a paradigm because I'm aware that like
Right.
in our faith community, we like of walking through it, like we've got piles of people and all of those, and
Yeah.
my expectation was among the three of us there would be like several categories like a little bit of this one, a little bit of that one, a little bit of that one. So Tyler, anything about you or your experiences that puts you in a like, I need to know God was in this and it's clear and cut and dry, or no, I really need to hear, because this, again, just circling back, this is like my observation that it's not that people want one or the other and one has done damage, but it's that people are kind of like breaking in different ways as far as what they need in the face of that.
Well, I think it's hard because I think I tackled this from an intellectual perspective before a personal one.
Yeah.
So like when I was in my 20s and, you know, just reading as much as I can and, you know, a younger Christian and just trying to understand different perspectives and different answers to the question and landing on the one that I felt like most reflected with my view of scripture, but also how I see reality is that, you know, cancer doesn't just show up because like God's like, boop, yep, now you did good job, or a lightning strike or some tragedy that doesn't really answer the problem. I think in some ways God was preparing me for a moment where, like you, Christy, I would watch my mother go through cancer and in a short period of time at 58 years old would pass away. And those, everything happens for a reason, preordained types of theologies don't work in that moment, and there's not a lot of grace in it, and so at least I don't see that it that way, but we live in a screwed up world where we're allowed to make bad choices, and when you start smoking when you're 14 and all the way up until, you know,
and we're using hairspray and
those
eating all kinds of carcinogenic things, and your national life is
my
dropping,
Taco Bell
testing
out of it.
atom bombs all through your childhood. 600
I think it was
miles
mostly the smoking,
farther
but
west.
yes.
All these things add up, you know.
Sure, yeah. You know, so it's like those are the consequences of the free will that we have, and we're allowed to make those bad choices. And I think there's still beauty and grace in it, and I agree. I think God uses it and uses that moment, and but yeah, that's I guess on the flip side, that became an anchor for me to continue in faith even through a difficult time. Is that it was an answer enough for me that the world's terrible, it sucks, and God's still here and He's with us along the way. And that's enough of an answer, and I don't have to sort of create a monster out of my God who, you know, did this intentionally to a person. So, yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Glenn?
I have a couple things that work in my favor. One is the person I'm married to. Like I think was raised in a very like God's involved in everything, and I think I still am afflicted by like in a kind of a naive way and in a positive way, that kind of expectation, like God's behind this, God's involved in things. But Amy was very good at different times being like, that is not the way the world works. Like this stuff, like you cannot give God credit for X, Y, or Z. Like to some point, like you have to take responsibility for X, Y, or Z. like his eye is on the sparrow, but sometimes the sparrow hits the car windshield, like
it gets stuck in the grill and you show up and you're like, hey, look at that. That's
like
weird.
some of that kind of
Is it supposed to have been that way? I guess not.
I mean this in profound appreciation. Like, she made me a better pastor from that kind of like really clear-eyed critique of things I would say or do or think. But like, she had a real good vision on like trying to anchor some of kind of, I think, a positive youthful naivete about God's got it. It's all gonna be fine. So that's a piece. I think in terms of a specific moment, I was doing chaplaincy, CPE, clinical pastoral education, which was required at that time for ordination. It's not anymore. And so I was on call in a hospital. And a few days after Christmas, we got a call at one point. We need a chaplain in the ER. There was a house fire, a first grader. They couldn't find the first grader. And so I sat for 2 or 3 hours with the parents. I was out in the hall when the fire marshal came and said, chaplain, we need you to come in with us. And like, it's happened a few times. This was one of them that you can hear the howl of the profound gaping, churning maw of destruction that's out in the world seeking to gobble people up. Like, I can't, it's there. Like, it's just like, and you can almost hear it if you're in the right place at the right time, the kind of roar of destructive power that I don't want to relive. And I did not suffer that like this family did, obviously. I'm just present in the moment with them, but coming out on the other side of it and just being like, for me, there was nothing made that better. Mm-hmm. There was nothing that I could be like, oh, God has a plan. God's got, I did have the memory of by the morning, I remember the family had a church they were just kind of connected to. And so part of your job in that role is to connect back with the faith community. So I called the pastor, and he just like had a very peripheral knowledge. And he and his family were like that. It was like right after Christmas. They were like leaving for Disney in like an hour. And I just remember that, like, giving him that time at like 5 a.m. to like wake up for 5 minutes on the phone with me.
Jeez.
And be like, we're going to figure out. And so, of course, I don't think it would have been, he was not going to change his plan, but what he did was he contacted church members. And so I remember as the sun was coming up, the elevator dinged and opens the door, and here come people carrying blankets and food and all kinds of, into the hospital room where the family was. And the supervisor at the time was like, Glenn, I want you to process what that felt like for the community to show up for the family like that at that point, and to make sure that they were going to be cared for. And I do think that does kind of bring back around to something that Christy was observing in her Madeline L'Engle quote, which is at the end of the day, the meaning a Christian makes out of all of it is kind of understood through the life and presence of Christ, and the assertion that God doesn't leave us in the mess, but that God comes to us in it, no matter what degree it's been influenced by our choices or not, or by our negligence or not, or by just like some things that are inexplicably horrific that that are natural events, a tornado, a hurricane, whatever. That the Christian assertion is God doesn't leave us alone in that. And that kind of might be a simplistic response in a way, but I think that also gives a lot of latitude for what people need. If you need to believe what way God was in this was that God was working through it and has a plan for it and whatever, then okay, let's, with curiosity, explore what is that? I'm not in a position to pour cold water on that.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's your story and you're living it.
Yeah.
And if you're like, no, cancer happens, and it wasn't.
God didn't put it there.
There's no shortage of stories of people who, smoke their whole life and they never get cancer,
Right.
or who don't smoke and get lung cancer, and whatever else, So like, if there's no explanation, I think that's okay too. And I think that kind of like, no matter what, that God shows up in that and is with us in it, and in some sort of way demonstrates a love for us that kind of shares in our pathology, in our brokenness, that empathetically shares in our brokenness. Like, this is the ultimate Christian assertion, that that's what the cross is. It's the God who comes into the world, takes on our situation, and takes it on to such a degree that God will share in our experience of the pain and suffering and evil and brokenness of the world by submitting to it, to be with us. So anyway, but even that might be too simplistic for some folks, and so I think if some folks were in the place of like, I just don't know, I'm okay with that too.
Yeah, one of the things I didn't get to, I'd meant to share at one point, was another previous pastor of mine. She had some routine blood work done, right? And it came back with some weird markers. So they did more. Came back with leukemia. Did all sorts of other tests with it. And then about a month later, they were doing one more to determine like what kind of leukemia, how fast is it growing, so they can determine what kind of chemotherapy they want to do. She went in for the test. It was gone. All of it was gone. No explanation. The leukemia was just gone. And they like, it wasn't like we just saw some
Clerical error.
Like, it wasn't
anything,
something like that.
Yeah.
Like, it was just gone, which is amazing. And it's one of those things where it's like, praise the Lord. But I can guarantee when she shared the message with the church, though everyone celebrated with her, I can guarantee there are people there that are like,
what about where's my miracle?
Where's my miracle?
Right, yeah.
And like, I can't imagine as a pastor, and she's a great pastor, so I know that like she handled that well. I'm positive, because that's the kind of stuff she handles nuance so well.
Yeah.
But
in a church like St. Joe, though, that like among the laity, that story plays out like in both directions 3 times a week.
Oh, I bet.
Like every week we
Yeah.
could have somebody who comes in and is like, I want to thank God because I got a bad test result, but now it's good. And I thank God for the healing,
Right,
and
sure.
every week, this is who we are, right?
Oh, yeah,
like
absolutely.
there is no unanimity about anything. Like, there are people that are going to come with that, and there are other people who are going to be like, I'm praying for the healing, and there's other people who are going to be like,
it doesn't exist. It's a myth. We live in the Matrix.
I don't know about that far, but there are people who would be like,
too far. Back it off.
it's going to happen, whatever. And some of the most interesting people are the people who are like, well, we're going to work at the scientific process and all this, but whatever happens, the judgments of the Lord are right and good altogether. Which is a kind of I think maybe where I would fall almost, that it would be in my own personal, like if I got that test result, I'd be like, we're going to follow the science, we're going to do it. And at the end of the day, if the verdict is, Glenn, you're not going to make it, it'd be like,
people like asking
I will
you
receive
to pray
the-
for like healing?
yeah, if you want me to pray for that, I'll write the check and I'll, no.
Right the check. Right on the head.
and I'll call Ashley or Luke and get him in there. No,
You know what? Because it's so funny, because pastors are really good about sort of like skirting that like wordage to be like,
no. If somebody says, this is the kind of stuff you learn after just doing it a little bit. But if I go into and they're in the hospital or whatever, and say, how do you want me? How do we pray today? And they'll say, well, I want to get better. I want to be.
But that's not your like. If let's say somebody says, I have no words, just pray.
Yeah.
You wouldn't jump to just make a miracle happen today, Lord.
No, because that's not what they're asking for, and that's not where their heart is.
But they
in
didn't
their
ask you
leading.
anything.
Yeah, but I think you got to listen to the silence too sometimes.
Okay, all right.
The sound of silence, Tyler.
It's
the
funny.
sound of
There
silence.
you know what I'm trying to say. There are pastors who have specific.
So
like this. The answer to this question also influences how you pray and how you interact
my
with
first
people.
church.
That's true.
Here's the short answer: is there's no way to do this that you're going to make people happy all the time. My first church I was at, we had a guy who was slowly dying of cancer, and it was like in the bone in the leg, and one surgery after, and it was a hugely formative thing for me as a pastor. And looking back, I was like 23 or 24, and this guy was like 60. He was a lifelong teacher, and looking back, I know without a shadow of a doubt, this guy is going through this experience in his life. And when I would show up, I think he was grand enough to let me comfort him, but I think honestly he was also thinking, I'm training a pastor. What kind of what? There are people like that in the world? You're right. Yeah,
he's going through this terrible thing,
and he's thinking, I'm training a pastor.
Yeah.
And which is, I mean, if you stop and think about that, if I stop and think about that long enough, I'm like, geez, I'm a terrible person. I've squandered this thing. Like, people have given me this gift. Yeah. Anyway, so trying to pray for him. When you're with somebody a lot, you start to like watch their read of their own situation change. And so there was a time where he was like, I'm fighting, I'm going to beat this, I'm going to survive, and there came a point that he's like, I want to figure out how to get things to a place where like my family's taken care of. And I've got some of these things squared away. And so then like being 24 or whatever, like my public prayers before the church start to reflect that pivot a little bit. And it was more, and I didn't know how to pray about it, so I'd be like, God, if it's your will, we just ask for some healing in this situation. That was the only way I knew how to articulate it at that point. Gotcha. And this guy came up after church and he was like, it is your job to pray for his healing, to trust in God's ability to provide it, to call down the blessings of heaven.
Call down. I love that.
Don't
like
be
it's
out
magic.
There.
Like he's got
Tyler, I have been ran through by so many people over the years.
So good.
Like, and you know,
can you record some of these?
Oh, a lot of it I deserve.
That would be so
Let
good.
me be clear.
Okay.
A lot of it I deserve.
Okay.
Stupid things I've said where they're like, you shouldn't have, you know. But in this case, he just ran me through about like, you got to expect that. And
faith is a mustard seed.
It actually, his pep talk had the opposite of its intended effect.
That's exactly why.
Because I was like, I am not going to do that, especially when that is not the sense of this very faithful, faith-filled person who I'm praying for. That's not what he's asking for anymore.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah,
you learn a lot of different...
Yeah. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just saying there are, you know,
every day is on this. When you're, and this is like, I think I do more of this even now than Luke or Ashley do, just because of like the way everything's set up. I do, I don't know, but I feel like more hospital calls and stuff. Okay.
Not even close.
He's like trying to figure out, like, I might do, and you're like, oh yeah.
Well, I know I do more than Ashley, but part of it's just like what we're doing, like in the life of the church.
Yeah.
But so no, every day's on the spot, and every day you like walk into a hospital, or not every day, but the days you walk into a hospital room or a nursing home or whatever, somebody's home. You know, the thing you're trying to figure out is where, like, I don't want to assume that I have more faith or knowledge of God than the people I'm going to go pray. Like, even think about this guy who's like, I'm training a pastor.
Yeah.
He never said that, but I like figured it out later.
Right.
You know? Like, I didn't know more than him.
Yeah.
And there's tons of people that I don't know more than them. I don't know more about their life or their situations.
Right.
So every time you're on the spot, and you just got to try to listen to where people are at. And sometimes it happens that they're like, well, I want to be healed. And then the next time you go back, they're like, you know, the Lord and I've been talking. And I don't know that's the way this is going at this point. Yeah. So I guess what I want to pray is this, you know.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. People are really interesting.
Man, that was some great conversation in this episode. And hey, it's Austin here. We would love to continue that conversation as well down in the comments. All of us will be looking at the comments down there, answering back to you. And who knows, maybe in the future we'll do a comments episode. I think that would be fun. So yeah, like, share the video, comment down below. You can send us an email, at churchbites@stjoemin.com. That's churchbites@stjoemin.com. And we're going to be having some live events coming up here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We'd love for you to come out to those. We'll dive even deeper into these topics, and it's going to be a great time in a safe environment. Details on that will be down in the show description and the show notes. And we hope you have a great week. See ya.